Welcome, dear listener, to another quiet journey into the past. Today, we will wander through the slow, often overlooked moments of history, the ones that shaped lives, ideas, and the world we know, quietly and without fanfare. Here, time moves gently. We will linger in workshops, libraries, and sunlit streets, following ordinary people performing extraordinary acts of patience and care. So find a comfortable place, let your mind settle, and allow the stories of centuries past to unfold, slowly, like pages turning under candlelight. This is boring past times for sleep where history whispers, and you can drift into the calm rhythm of the past. Imagine standing on the edge of a wooden canoe, balanced precariously on the rolling Pacific swells. The horizon stretches endlessly in every direction, a seamless sheet of blue, shifting and shimmering with the wind and sunlight. There is no coastline to guide you, no lighthouses, no printed maps, no GPS coordinates whispering your position. Yet, somewhere in your mind, a map exists, one that has been built, refined, and passed down over generations. This map is not drawn on paper. It is inscribed in memory, experience, and observation. It is the birth of oceanic mapping as a mental art, a quiet skill that few outside the islands could ever imagine. Polynesian navigation, often misunderstood or romanticized in popular culture, was rooted in practicality, patience, and the slow accumulation of empirical knowledge. From as early as 3,000 years ago, Polynesian sailors were venturing across thousands of miles of open ocean, colonizing remote islands in the Pacific. This was no reckless wandering. Each voyage was carefully planned, often dictated by the seasons, the winds, and the knowledge of currents, swells, and stars. The maps they created in their minds were as precise as any chart, yet invisible to the eye. The creation of these mental maps began with observation. Young navigators were trained from an early age to notice the subtle nuances of the environment. The direction of the trade winds, which blow consistently from east to west in certain latitudes, provided a predictable framework for planning travel. Ocean swells, generated by distant storms, could indicate the presence of islands long before they appeared on the horizon. Even the flight patterns of seabirds offered hints of land. Certain birds only ventured so far from shore, returning at dusk to their nesting sites. These observations were painstakingly recorded in memory and shared through oral instruction, often in rhythmic chants or stories, to ensure retention. But observation alone was insufficient. The Polynesian navigator had to translate these observations into a dynamic understanding of space and distance. They measured distance by time, how long it took to travel a certain stretch of ocean under a given wind, or how long a particular current would carry them in a given direction. They noted the shifts in the sun's position at dawn and dusk, which provided subtle compass points. They memorized star paths, understanding which constellations would rise or set at particular points on the horizon throughout the year. In essence, the navigator's mind became a three-dimensional chart: stars overhead, swells beneath, and invisible currents weaving through the water. Consider the role of memory in this process. In a world without writing, memory was everything. Stories, songs, and chants acted as repositories of geographic knowledge. They were precise in their vagueness, enough detail to guide, yet flexible enough to adapt to the unpredictable sea. These oral maps were often structured around practical mnemonics. When the frigate bird circles above at noon, the northern reef lies ahead, or if the swells meet from two directions, the island lies to starboard. Each phrase might seem mundane, a trivial observation of birds or waves, but it was a critical data point in a network of mental markers that allowed the Polynesians to navigate with remarkable accuracy. The canoes themselves were extensions of this knowledge. Their design reflected an understanding of ocean dynamics and intended travel patterns. Double-hulled canoes, for instance, were stable on long voyages, capable of carrying dozens of people, their provisions, and sometimes animals. Every curve of the hull, every lash of a rope, was informed by experience and experimentation across generations. These vessels were more than transport. They were floating laboratories of knowledge, teaching those aboard the subtle shifts of waves, wind, and weather. Perhaps the most extraordinary aspect of these mental maps was their adaptability. Unlike a paper map, which is fixed, the navigator's map could adjust with new information. If a current had shifted, if an island appeared unexpectedly, or if the winds were contrary, the navigator recalibrated their understanding in real time. This cognitive flexibility required intense concentration, a deep connection with the environment, and a lifelong commitment to learning. It was not a skill one acquired overnight. It was honed over decades, passed from mentor to apprentice, in a process as much ritual as instruction. The process of learning this map also reinforced social structures. Navigators held a unique status in Polynesian societies. Their knowledge was invaluable, often safeguarded through secrecy, and they were entrusted with the survival of entire communities. Decisions about when and where to travel were weighty, sometimes determining the fate of an entire village. A navigator who misread the stars or misunderstood a current could condemn their people 2 weeks adrift, rationing dwindling supplies and facing storms that could erase all traces of human effort. In this context, the development of mental maps was both a practical and a moral endeavor. Even so, there were limitations. No navigator, however skilled, could predict every variable of the open ocean. Storms could appear without warning, currents could deviate, and the horizon could be misleading under shifting light. The mental map was an approximation, not an absolute guarantee. And yet, over centuries, these navigators achieved something remarkable. They explored and settled one of the largest and most scattered geographic regions on Earth, long before European contact, without compasses or written maps. Their mental cartographies transformed the vast, intimidating Pacific into a navigable and knowable space. One observation, one story, one wave, and birds while remaining physically balanced on a canoe cons. The quiet patience this work demanded. There were no dramatic battles or heroic duels. There were only hours and days of careful attention, small adjustments, and the slow accumulation of knowledge. In many ways, this is the essence of boring history at its most profound. Survival and mastery, not through spectacle, but through meticulous observation, repetition, and memory. Yet, even in this world of careful observation and disciplined practice, questions linger. How exactly did navigators transmit knowledge so effectively without error over generations? How were disputes resolved when two experienced navigators disagreed on the position of a distant island? And most intriguingly, how did they conceptualize their maps in the mind's eye? Was it more visual, more spatial, more intuitive? These questions remind us that much of this ancient knowledge is lost to time, leaving us with only glimpses of the remarkable cognitive feats performed daily by Polynesian navigators. In the next section, we will explore how these navigators extended their mental maps beyond memory into a sophisticated understanding of celestial patterns, ocean swells, and seasonal rhythms, deepening the story of how they mastered the vast Pacific without a single written chart. As the sun dips below the horizon, the Pacific transforms from a glittering expanse of turquoise and gold into a vast, dark canvas dotted with stars. For the Polynesian navigator, this is no mere spectacle. It is a critical tool, a celestial atlas that allows the mind to measure distance, direction, and time. In the previous section, we explored the concept of mental maps, the internalized knowledge of currents, swells, birds, and winds. Now we turn to the celestial dimension, where mastery of the night sky allowed navigators to chart courses across thousands of miles without ever seeing land. Polynesian star navigation is intricate and precise. Each star has a trajectory, rising and setting at specific points on the horizon, which shifts slowly over the seasons. By memorizing these patterns, navigators created a framework of fixed points for orientation. In a sense, the sky served as a rotating compass. Young apprentices learned to recognize constellations not by their names, but by their positions relative to the horizon at particular times of year. They memorized the star lines, imaginary pathways that led from island to island, like invisible roads stretching across the ocean. Stars were not learned in isolation. Each star's path was linked to a constellation of swells, winds, and environmental cues. For instance, the rising of certain stars in the east might signal the approach of a particular swell pattern, which in turn hinted at the presence of an island hundreds of miles away. Navigators combined these celestial markers with tactile knowledge, the subtle tilt of the canoe, the rhythm of waves, the pull of currents. Every voyage was a symphony of observation, where the navigator's senses, memory, and intuition blended into a single instrument capable of discerning direction across a featureless sea. Yet stars alone were insufficient. The Polynesians developed an extraordinary sensitivity to the ocean itself. Swells, generated by distant storms, propagate over thousands of miles. By feeling the tilt of the canoe and observing how waves intersect and combine, a navigator could detect the influence of islands long before they were visible. An island interrupts the flow of swells, creating reflections, eddies, and secondary waves that ripple outward. Experienced navigators read these patterns like a subtle script on the water's surface, a tilt here, a shift there, and the location of an unseen island emerges from the chaos of the ocean. In addition, seasonal winds, known in Polynesian terms as trade winds and monsoon winds, allowed navigators to plan the timing of voyages. They knew when the winds would favor travel westward, when they would shift and make return journeys possible. This knowledge was not written in any manual, but encoded in generations of oral instruction, combined with observation of flora and fauna, flowering plants, migratory birds, and the appearance of certain fish, all served as seasonal markers, aligning biological rhythms with meteorological patterns. A navigator had to integrate these signals, matching them against the mental map of the ocean and the star lines. Above, consider the learning process for an apprentice navigator. The initial years were often spent on short coastal voyages, gradually extending to open ocean trips under the supervision of experienced mentors. Apprentices learned by repetition and imitation, spending hours tracking the motion of waves and stars, noting the subtle cues in water, wind, and wildlife. Mistakes were inevitable, yet each error provided critical lessons. A misread swell or a misjudged star line could leave a canoe off course for hours or even days. The ocean, indifferent and vast, was an unforgiving teacher, but there was also ritual and ceremony woven into navigation. Voyages were often preceded by prayers or offerings to deities associated with the sea, sky, or particular islands. These rituals were more than superstition. They reinforced the seriousness of the journey, reminding everyone aboard of the stakes involved and the precision required. In a society where survival depended on understanding and respecting the natural world, ritual, observation, and memory were deeply intertwined. The process of navigating the ocean also demanded meticulous planning in practical terms. Voyages could last weeks or even months. Canoes carried carefully rationed food, fresh water stored in gourds or carved wooden containers, and, in some cases, live animals to establish new colonies. Navigators had to estimate consumption rates, anticipate shortages, and plan for contingencies, all while maintaining vigilance over natural signs that could guide or mislead them. Every voyage was an exercise in resource management, timekeeping, and environmental literacy. Merged with the mental cartography described in Section 1, an interesting dimension of Polynesian navigation lies in the adaptability of the mental map itself. No two voyages were identical, and environmental conditions varied daily. Currents shifted slightly, swells met at different angles, clouds obscured star patterns. Navigators learned to recalibrate continuously, using each observation to refine their mental representation of the ocean. This was not static knowledge. It was a living, evolving system, constantly updated with new data. In modern cognitive terms, the Polynesian navigator practiced a form of active spatial reasoning and dynamic memory, skills that rival even today's technological mapping systems in complexity and effectiveness. Furthermore, Polynesian navigation demonstrates the remarkable human capacity for collective memory. Knowledge was seldom possessed by a single individual. It was encoded in family lines, taught through generations, and reinforced by communal practices. A navigator might lead a canoe, but their understanding of the ocean represented centuries of accumulated experience. Even when some islands were lost to memory or voyages failed, the knowledge that survived guided future generations, creating an unbroken chain of oceanic literacy across thousands of miles of open water. Despite this incredible sophistication, questions remain. How did navigators train themselves to detect the subtlest wave patterns in the dark of night? How did they ensure that the mental map remained accurate over decades without written verification? And, crucially, how did Polynesians conceptualize the ocean as a structured space? Did they think in terms of points and lines, zones and swells, or a more fluid, intuitive sense of spatial relationships. These unresolved questions remind us of the profound mysteries hidden in even the boring details of history, as much as they highlight human ingenuity in mastering one of the world's most formidable environments. In the next section, we will explore the culmination of these skills, the actual voyages across thousands of miles of open ocean, the challenges faced during long journeys, and the remarkable ways Polynesian navigators ensured survival while connecting distant islands. We will follow these voyages to their conclusions, revealing how mental maps, celestial navigation, and environmental mastery converged to achieve what might otherwise seem impossible. The morning sun rises over the gentle swells, casting a pale light across the ocean as a double-hulled canoe slips silently into motion. Every journey begins with preparation food, carefully rationed, water stored in gourds, sails inspected, and lines secured. The navigator stands at the stern, eyes scanning the horizon, feeling the tilt of the canoe, listening to the rhythm of waves beneath the hull. The mental map built over years, the knowledge of stars, swells, and winds, is now put to its ultimate test. Polynesian voyaging was rarely impulsive. Routes were planned based on the convergence of multiple natural factors, trade winds that would carry the canoe westward, the appearance of particular stars above the horizon, swells indicating distant islands, and the seasonal patterns of migratory birds. A miscalculation could mean days adrift, depletion of provisions, and, in extreme cases, disaster. Yet these voyages, undertaken with remarkable consistency, allowed Polynesians to colonize thousands of islands, scattered across millions of square miles. One of the most extraordinary aspects of these journeys was the sheer duration and isolation involved. Voyages from Tahiti to Hawaii, for example, could take several weeks, crossing more than 2,500 miles of open ocean. There were no landmarks, no visual cues, just the infinite expanse of sea and sky. To maintain orientation, navigators relied on the integrated system of knowledge we have examined in the previous sections: mental maps, celestial charts, swell patterns, seasonal winds, and wildlife behavior. Each observation was a critical data point. Even a single misread swell or cloud formation could necessitate recalibration, requiring constant vigilance and adaptive thinking. Life aboard the canoe was monotonous yet demanding. Hours passed in the rocking rhythm of waves, punctuated by small tasks, checking lines, adjusting sails, monitoring the water supply, fishing to supplement food stores, and tending to the sick or fatigued. Navigators instructed apprentices not only in observation and memory, but also in the art of endurance. Mental fortitude was as essential as physical skill. Boredom and fatigue were persistent adversaries. Yet it was in these mundane moments, the careful measuring of water, the quiet observation of a passing bird, that the survival of the crew and the success of the voyage were decided. Isolation on the open ocean fostered an intimate awareness of time and space. Navigators measured days by the position of the sun, by the sequence of stars appearing at dusk, or by the behavior of marine life. Seabirds offered both reassurance and information. The sighting of a species that never strayed far from land could indicate proximity to an island. Fish patterns, cloud formations, and even the color of the sea conveyed subtle hints. Every detail mattered, yet none could be relied upon in isolation. Success demanded the integration of multiple signals, the ability to synthesize them into a coherent mental model of the surrounding ocean. Arrival at an island was rarely sudden. On the horizon, a faint shadow of green might appear, only discernible after hours of careful observation. A navigator could detect this by reading the reflection of swells against the shore, the angle of waves, or the behavior of birds circling overhead. The moment of landfall, after weeks of exposure to endless sea, was both relief and triumph. For the navigator, it was confirmation that mental maps, celestial charts, and environmental cues had aligned correctly, validating the centuries of accumulated knowledge that made the journey possible. But not every voyage was a success. Storms could scatter crews, currents could carry them far off course, and supplies could run dangerously low. Some expeditions failed, their canoes lost to the vast Pacific. In these moments, the mental map was tested not just as a tool for navigation, but as a lifeline for survival. The capacity to adjust, to improvise, and to read subtle cues from the environment was the difference between life and death. This constant tension between the predictable and the predictable, the known swells versus the sudden storm-shaped, the Polynesian approach to oceanic travel, fostering resilience, patience, and attentiveness. One fascinating element is the interplay between individual skill and collective memory. While the navigator guided the canoe, the entire crew participated in observation and maintenance. Knowledge was both personal and communal. Experienced navigators trained apprentices, while communities shared stories and chants that encoded navigational knowledge. The map in the mind was thus simultaneously an individual tool and a cultural inheritance. Even as some information faded with time or individuals passed away, the collective memory persisted, preserved through oral tradition and ritualized practice over centuries. These voyages created vast networks of interconnected islands, enabling trade, migration, and cultural exchange. The mental maps of navigators shaped the very geography of Polynesian settlement, guiding not only the location of villages, but also the spread of plants, animals, and ideas across the Pacific. Every island discovered, every route successfully traversed, was a testament to the ingenuity and patience of these navigators, a quiet, uncelebrated achievement in human history. The mental maps developed by Polynesian navigators also remind us of the profound human ability to adapt cognition to extreme environments. Long before modern navigation tools, humans could master complex spatial relationships, anticipate environmental patterns, and solve problems that challenged even the most sophisticated technologies. These achievements were born not from spectacle or conflict, but from calm observation, repetition, and an enduring respect for the natural world, a history of quiet mastery that often goes unnoticed, yet is no less remarkable. As we reflect on these voyages, we might ask ourselves, how would we navigate such uncertainty without tools? Could the human mind alone reliably guide a vessel across thousands of miles of open ocean? And what does this tell us about the overlooked ingenuity embedded in boring human survival strategy skills, honed in silence, repeated for generations, and critical to the expansion of our species across one of the largest oceans on the planet? Thus, The story of Polynesian mental maps is not merely a tale of navigation. It is a story of patience, observation, endurance, and the quiet brilliance of human cognition. It reminds us that the mundane details, waves, stars, swells, birds can carry extraordinary significance when understood deeply. It is a history that lulls with its calm, repetitive rhythms, yet resonates with a profound lesson. Mastery, often invisible, lies in the careful accumulation of knowledge and the disciplined attention to the ordinary. Long before compasses, charts, or clocks, Polynesian navigators turned their eyes upward. For them, the night sky was more than a canopy of stars. It was a living, shifting map, one that could guide a canoe across thousands of miles of open ocean. Stars rose and set in precise locations at predictable times, forming celestial highways that stretched from one island to another. Yet these were not charts on parchment. They were mental maps, encoded in memory, practiced repeatedly, and reinforced through generations of observation. Imagine the moment when dusk settles over a calm sea. The sun sinks below the horizon, leaving a gradient of deep blues and violet shadows across the waves. Stars emerge, one by one, almost imperceptibly at first, then more boldly, like pinpricks of light, stitching the sky into patterns. For a trained navigator, each of these points has meaning. Some are fixed markers for orientation. Others serve as indicators of seasonal change. Certain constellations rising over the horizon at specific times signal not only direction, but also the changing winds and currents, or the migration of birds and fish that provide crucial information for survival at sea. Training in celestial navigation began in early childhood. Apprentices accompanied their mentors on coastal voyages, learning to identify stars, understand their rising and setting points, and associate them with the horizon. The process was painstaking. Memory was reinforced through chants and songs, which often contained encoded instructions, sequences of stars, directions, distances, and the expected appearance of celestial bodies at different times of the year. These mnemonic devices were more than educational tools. They were a survival necessity. Forget a star line, misinterpret the rising point of a constellation, and a canoe could drift far off course into open water with no hope of reaching land. Stars were only one element of the navigational system, but their importance was paramount. The Southern Cross, for example, provided a near-constant reference point for latitude in the southern hemisphere. Its position relative to the horizon allowed navigators to estimate their north-south location. But navigators did not rely on single stars alone. They observed groups of stars, constellations, and their interactions with the horizon. These patterns formed a framework of star lines, imaginary corridors that guided journeys across thousands of miles of seemingly empty ocean. Each line connected islands like invisible threads, allowing a navigator to move confidently across vast expanses without sight of land. The precision with which these celestial patterns were understood is astonishing. Navigators could estimate latitude by the angle of a star above the horizon, a skill requiring keen perception, repeated practice, and the ability to account for subtle changes caused by atmospheric conditions or seasonal shifts. Equally impressive was the integration of this knowledge with other observations. the direction and rhythm of swells, the behavior of the wind, the flight paths of birds, and even the shape and color of clouds. The stars were a critical reference, but they functioned within a network of information, each element informing the others, like an interwoven system of checks and balances that ensured accuracy in navigation. Yet the story of star navigation is not just about technical skill. It is also about cultural transmission and social structure. Navigators were highly respected in Polynesian societies, entrusted with the safety of entire crews and communities. Teaching was deliberate, disciplined, and often ritualized. An apprentice did not simply memorize star positions. They learned when and how to observe, how to interpret subtle differences, and how to integrate that knowledge into the broader mental map of the ocean. The apprenticeship could last years, with knowledge passed orally, reinforced through repeated voyages, and constantly tested against real-world conditions. In addition, navigators developed an acute sense of the seasonal movement of stars. Polynesian knowledge did not rely on static observation, but on a dynamic understanding of time. Certain stars were visible only during particular seasons, signaling the optimal period for voyages or the availability of resources on distant islands. Navigators understood not only spatial relationships, but temporal ones, linking the sky to environmental cycles on land and at sea. This integration of celestial, biological, and environmental information created a sophisticated system of knowledge that modern scholars are only beginning to fully appreciate. The stars also served as a psychological anchor during long, monotonous journeys. In the isolation of the open ocean, with the horizon unbroken for days, even weeks, the night sky provided continuity, orientation, and reassurance. By knowing the expected positions of stars, navigators maintained confidence in their direction and pace, reducing the mental strain of uncertainty. In a sense, the sky was both a practical tool and a stabilizing companion, a constant in a world otherwise defined by motion, change, and unpredictability. Despite the remarkable accuracy and reliability of star navigation, questions remain about its cognitive processes. How did navigators mentally visualize the positions of hundreds of stars while simultaneously tracking swells, winds, and currents? How did they adapt when clouds obscured the sky, or when unusual conditions altered their usual patterns of observation? And perhaps most intriguingly, how did Polynesian navigators conceptualize their maps? Did they see them as structured grids, fluid mental landscapes, or something entirely unique to their cultural perception of space? These questions hint at the limits of our understanding and the vastness of the navigator's achievements. Star navigation was not just a set of observations. It was an embodied practice, a cognitive skill developed over decades, refined across generations, and essential for the survival of entire island communities. It combined memorization, observation, pattern recognition, and adaptation in a way that few modern tools can replicate. As night deepens and the constellations arc across the sky, imagine the navigator standing at the stern of the canoe, the cool wind on their face, eyes scanning the horizon and the heavens simultaneously. Every movement, every tilt of the vessel, every glance at the stars is part of a continuous, integrated process. The navigator's mind becomes the map, the chart, and the compass all at once. Each journey across the Pacific reinforces the system, adding refinements, correcting errors, and deepening understanding. Yet, even with all this mastery, uncertainty never fully disappears. Cloud cover, storms, and the unpredictable ocean can confound even the most experienced navigator. And so each voyage carries an element of suspense, a test of knowledge, memory, and intuition. How then did Polynesians cope with such uncertainty? How did they refine their star-based mental maps in the face of environmental variability? And how did the communal transmission of knowledge preserve these skills across generations, ensuring the survival of this extraordinary navigation system? In the next section, we will explore the practical application of these star charts during actual voyages. We will follow Polynesian navigators across the open ocean, witnessing how celestial knowledge was combined with environmental observation, careful preparation, and adaptive problem-solving to achieve remarkable feats of migration and exploration. The first light of dawn spreads softly across the ocean, and the stars fade slowly, retreating before the sun's growing presence. For the Polynesian navigator, however, the night's observations are never truly lost. They have been internalized, etched into memory through repetition and experience. As the morning mists lift, the navigator shifts focus, integrating solar observations with what was learned from the stars the previous night. The sun, like the stars, becomes a reference point away to maintain direction, estimate latitude, and reinforce the mental map of the surrounding ocean. Polynesian voyages relied on continuous observation, not a single instrument or method. During the day, the navigator notes the direction of the sun's travel, its angle above the horizon, and the behavior of shadows cast by the canoe or spars. Clouds, distant landforms, the color and movement of the sea, and the presence of birds all provide critical information. Swells, generated by far-off storms, intersect and interact in ways that hint at the location of hidden islands. By day or night, the navigator's mind is engaged in a constant process of synthesis, integrating multiple signals into a coherent sense of place. The apprenticeship process for such observation was both rigorous and immersive. Young navigators would spend years accompanying experienced guides, learning to feel the nuances of the ocean beneath their feet. A slight tilt of the canoe, a subtle shift in the rhythm of waves, or the approach of a faint wind could all provide clues about direction and distance. Instruction was oral and often ritualized, using chants and stories to encode knowledge of the stars, swells, and seasonal cycles. These mnemonics were more than poetic devices. They were functional repositories of survival information. One of the most fascinating aspects of Polynesian navigation is the way navigators adapted their celestial knowledge to real-world conditions. Clouds could obscure the stars, storms could alter swells, and the sun could be masked by haze. In these moments, the navigator did not falter, but instead relied on redundancy in their mental map. Multiple cues were always cross-checked. If the stars were hidden, the navigator might rely on swells and currents. If a current seemed inconsistent, the flight of birds or subtle color changes in the water could indicate land. This multi-layered system of navigation reflects a remarkable understanding of both the ocean and the sky. In practice, Voyages often involved more than simply moving from one island to another. They were exercises in risk management, timing, and adaptation. Canoes were provisioned with food and water, often in carefully measured quantities, to last the entire journey. Navigators needed to estimate travel time based on wind patterns, the direction and speed of swells, and the stamina of both crew and vessel. A miscalculation could leave the canoe stranded without sufficient resources, making every observation, every adjustment, critical for survival. Even minor details were significant. Certain seabirds, for example, only travel a few dozen miles from land. Spotting them could indicate an island nearby, while their absence suggested open ocean. Fish behavior, cloud reflections, and color variations in the water all acted as additional indicators. The navigator's mind became a complex computational system, continuously integrating sensory input and past experience to generate reliable predictions. Unlike a static chart, this mental map was flexible, adaptable, and updated in real time as new information emerged. Polynesian navigation also involved an understanding of seasonal and annual cycles. Certain stars appear only during specific times of the year, signaling optimal periods for travel, the migration of birds, or the ripening of fruits on distant islands. Understanding these cycles allowed navigators not only to move efficiently, but also to plan voyages that maximized the likelihood of survival and successful colonization. The combination of celestial, environmental, and biological knowledge created a sophisticated, adaptive system unmatched in scale or complexity for its time. Canoes themselves were designed to complement these navigational strategies. Double-hulled canoes offered stability on long voyages and could carry substantial provisions and passengers. Their sails and hull shapes were adapted to catch winds efficiently while withstanding the rigors of open ocean travel. Crew members were trained not just in rowing or sailing, but also in observation, maintenance, and emergency response. The vessel was both a home and a laboratory, teaching through experience as it carried people across thousands of miles of unpredictable sea. Despite this extraordinary skill set, voyages were never guaranteed to succeed. Storms, sudden changes in wind, and misread cues could jeopardize even the most experienced navigators. Many expeditions ended in failure or required extraordinary improvisation. Yet these challenges did not diminish the practice. Instead, they honed it. Each voyage was a lesson in adaptability, problem-solving, and resilience. The mental maps, star knowledge, and environmental observation systems were refined continually, becoming increasingly sophisticated with each generation. This practical integration of celestial knowledge and environmental awareness raises intriguing questions. How did navigators train themselves to remain calm and accurate during long, monotonous days at sea? How did they maintain and pass down knowledge over generations without error? And how did communities safeguard and transmit such critical skills in ways that ensured both survival and cultural continuity? The answers lie not only in the technical mastery of stars and swells, but also in the social and cultural systems that supported this knowledge. Apprenticeships and communal storytelling that encoded survival strategies into collective memory. In the next section, we will witness the culmination of these skills in extraordinary voyages across the Pacific. We will follow navigators as they apply their star charts and mental maps to actual journeys, overcoming storms, miscalculations, and uncertainty, and leaving a legacy of migration, exploration, and remarkable human resilience. Imagine yourself standing at the bow of a slender, double-hulled canoe balanced on the gentle swell of the Pacific. The water moves beneath you, not in random motion, but as a subtle, complex language one that can be read and interpreted with patience, practice, and keen observation. For the Polynesian navigator, the ocean was never merely a medium to traverse. It was a living text, each wave, ripple, and swell carrying information about distant storms, unseen islands, and the currents that would either guide or impede a voyage. Understanding this language was essential to survival. Swells are the most fundamental element of this oceanic text, generated by winds hundreds or even thousands of miles away. Swells travel in consistent patterns, creating undulating rhythms on the water's surface. These patterns, although often invisible to the untrained eye, convey a remarkable amount of information. By feeling the tilt of the canoe, observing the intersection of waves, and noting the rhythm of swell movement, navigators could detect the presence of islands long before they were visible on the horizon. Swells reflect, refract, and bend around land masses, creating subtle variations in height, direction, and interval that an experienced navigator could interpret like a map in motion. Apprentices spent years developing this sensitivity. Early training began with coastal voyages, where students learned to identify different types of swells, the ways they intersect, and the minute changes caused by underwater features or approaching land. Over time, the apprentice developed the ability to detect long-distance swells generated by far-off storms, learning to distinguish them from local waves caused by immediate winds. This skill was not theoretical. It required a combination of tactile perception, continuous observation, and mental integration with other navigational cues such as wind direction, cloud formation, and bird activity. Currents added another layer of complexity. Polynesian navigators learned to anticipate the speed and direction of ocean currents, understanding how these invisible flows could aid or hinder a journey. Currents influenced the drift of the canoe, the convergence of swells, and even the flight patterns of birds. They were subtle, often imperceptible, without careful attention. Yet they could determine the success or failure of a voyage. Knowledge of currents was both empirical and experiential, passed down orally, reinforced through repeated observation, and integrated into the navigator's mental map. Reading swells and currents was not merely an academic exercise. It was a constant, practical necessity. During weeks-long voyages, the navigator continuously adjusted course to harness favorable currents while compensating for those that might carry the canoe off course. Even a seemingly minor misinterpretation of a swell or drift could extend the journey by days or leave the canoe dangerously short of supplies. The mental map of the ocean, enriched with celestial guidance and environmental observation, was continually updated by these sensory readings of water movement. The process of interpreting ocean swells was highly integrated with other aspects of navigation. Certain swell patterns corresponded with particular star lines or seasonal winds. The angle of a swell could indicate the presence of an island, while the pattern of intersecting swells could signal the location of reefs or underwater shoals. Navigators also considered the relationship between swells and the behavior of birds or marine life. A flock of seabirds approaching from a specific direction, combined with a distinct swell pattern, might indicate an island just beyond the visible horizon. Each observation reinforced others, creating a robust system capable of guiding a canoe across thousands of miles with remarkable precision. The tactile nature of this knowledge cannot be overstated. Unlike stars or wind, which can be observed visually, swells and currents are often felt through the canoe. Navigators learned to sense subtle shifts in tilt, resistance, and rhythm. Over time, these sensations became second nature, integrated into the navigator's cognitive framework, allowing them to read the ocean as effortlessly as one might read a familiar text. Even subtle deviations from expected patterns could indicate hidden dangers or opportunities, requiring immediate adjustment. Apprenticeship in this skill was rigorous. Mentors would often ask students to close their eyes while aboard the canoe, forcing reliance on the tactile sensations of the water rather than visual cues. Students learned to detect differences in swell direction and intensity, to anticipate changes in currents, and to integrate this sensory input with prior knowledge of stars and wind. Mistakes were instructive. Misreading a swell could mean drifting off course, but it also provided immediate feedback, sharpening the student's perception and reinforcing the system of knowledge. What is striking about Polynesian mastery of swells and currents is the subtlety and precision involved. Modern technology can measure waves and currents with instruments, but the Polynesians did this purely through observation, experience, and memory. They understood how swells propagate, how currents interact with wind and tides, and how these factors vary with seasons and geography without written records or instruments. Their knowledge was embodied, practiced, and tested continuously against the ocean itself. Yet, even with these skills, uncertainty remained. The ocean is vast, dynamic, and occasionally unpredictable. Storms could alter swell patterns, currents could shift unexpectedly, and isolated islands could escape detection. Navigators had to maintain constant vigilance, integrating multiple sources of information and adapting quickly to changes. The ocean was a teacher, sometimes harsh, sometimes subtle, and always demanding. As we consider these practices, questions emerge. How did navigators conceptualize swells and currents in the mind's eye? Were they visualized as lines and flows, or understood more intuitively as patterns and rhythms? How was this sensory knowledge communicated across generations with such accuracy, ensuring that each new apprentice could read the ocean with the same skill as their elders? And what might this tell us about the extraordinary capacity of the human mind to integrate sensory input, memory, and environmental understanding in ways that remain astonishingly relevant today? In the next section, we will follow Polynesian navigators on actual voyages, observing how their knowledge of swells and currents interacts with star-based navigation and seasonal patterns to guide canoes across thousands of miles of open ocean. We will see the subtle, almost imperceptible cues that separate successful voyages from failure, revealing the quiet brilliance of this art of oceanic reading. As night blankets the Pacific, the navigator once again turns their gaze skyward. The canoe rocks gently beneath them, the rhythmic pulse of swells echoing against the hull. Each star, each constellation, is a known point in an intricate network of mental pathways stretching across thousands of miles. In the silence of the open ocean, these stars are not merely lights. They are guides, companions, and ultimately instruments of survival. The Polynesian voyages that relied on celestial knowledge were astounding in scope. Navigators led their canoes across hundreds and even thousands of miles, connecting distant islands scattered like green jewels across the vast expanse of blue. Consider, for instance, the journeys from the Society Islands to Hawaii, over 2,500 miles of open ocean. Each voyage required not only precise knowledge of star positions, but also the ability to interpret environmental cues, adjust for currents, and manage provisions for weeks at sea. It was a balancing act between planning, observation, and adaptability. Even minor errors could have catastrophic consequences. A misjudged latitude could leave a canoe hundreds of miles off course. A storm could obscure the stars entirely, forcing navigators to rely solely on swells, birds, and instinct. Yet despite these challenges, Polynesian navigators consistently accomplished what many modern observers would consider impossible without instruments. They demonstrated a mastery of both the visible heavens and the hidden rhythms of the ocean. Voyages were often undertaken with multiple layers of redundancy. Star lines were cross-checked with swell directions, cloud formations, and bird activity. Navigators observed the ocean's color and texture, noting subtle variations that indicated underwater reefs, approaching land, or shifting currents. Each observation reinforced the others, creating a resilient, adaptive system that allowed for continuous recalibration in the face of uncertainty. Mental maps were dynamic, updated in real time, and intimately tied to both celestial and environmental awareness. Life aboard the canoe was quiet and disciplined. Crews spent long hours in the monotony of rowing, adjusting sails, and maintaining the vessel, punctuated by periods of observation and calculation. Food and water were rationed carefully, often supplemented by fishing or collecting rainwater. Sleep was intermittent, with crew members rotating duties to ensure that someone was always observing the environment. The navigator's mind, however, remained almost continuously engaged, tracking the stars, swells, and wind, synthesizing them into a coherent understanding of position and direction. Arrival at an island after weeks at sea was a profound moment of validation. The navigator's mental maps, built from countless hours of observation and experience, had successfully guided the canoe across an immense, featureless ocean. Landfall was rarely immediate. The approach to an island often relied on subtle sign changes in swell patterns reflected by distant reefs, the call of a bird returning to shore, or faint color shifts in the water hinting at shallow depths. These were small details, easily overlooked by the untrained eye, yet critical for ensuring a safe arrival. Failures, too, were instructive. Canoes occasionally missed islands, ran low on provisions, or encountered storms that scattered crews. Such events were not seen as shameful, but as opportunities to refine techniques, strengthen apprenticeships, and improve collective knowledge. The oral traditions that encoded navigational wisdom were continually tested and validated against real-world experience, creating a resilient system that could endure across generations. The cultural significance of these voyages was immense. Successful navigation enabled migration, trade, and the establishment of interconnected communities across vast distances. It allowed for the spread of plants, animals, and cultural practices, effectively shaping the human geography of the Pacific. Navigators were revered not merely as experts in travel but as custodians of knowledge, whose skills ensured the survival and prosperity of entire societies. What is particularly remarkable is the cognitive achievement embedded in this practice. Navigators integrated memory, perception, pattern recognition, and problem-solving at a level that rivals modern technological systems. Without instruments or written maps, they achieved an extraordinary degree of accuracy and reliability, demonstrating the human mind's capacity to adapt to extreme environments. The integration of celestial, environmental, and biological cues created a sophisticated, flexible, and deeply reliable navigational system. Even today, modern scientists and navigators study these methods to understand how Polynesians achieved such remarkable feats. Experiments replicating traditional voyages have confirmed the accuracy of star-based navigation, showing that, with training and careful observation, it is possible to traverse thousands of miles without modern tools. These achievements underscore the quiet genius of Polynesian navigators, skills honed over centuries, often invisible, but essential for human expansion across one of the largest oceans on the planet. Yet questions linger. How exactly did navigators mentally process hundreds of stars while tracking the dynamic ocean environment? How were this knowledge and intuition passed on with such precision, generation after generation, without error? And how might these techniques inform modern navigation, environmental observation, or even cognitive science? These unresolved questions remind us that history's boring details, careful observation, repetition, and incremental learning often contain the most profound lessons. The story of Polynesian celestial navigation is a testament to human patience, ingenuity, and resilience. It is a history of quiet mastery, achieved not through spectacle or confrontation, but through disciplined attention to ordinary, often overlooked details: the rising of a star, the tilt of a canoe, the flight of a bird. In these small, deliberate acts, entire civilizations expanded across the Pacific, leaving a legacy of exploration, survival, and cultural continuity that continues to inspire awe today. The open ocean stretches endlessly in every direction, a shifting mosaic of blues and greens, ripples and waves, calm patches and restless swells. To an untrained eye, it may seem uniform, almost indistinguishable from one day to the next. Yet, to the Polynesian navigator, this vast expanse is alive with information, a living, breathing map written in motion. Every swell carries a story: where the wind has blown, which storms have passed, and, crucially, where distant islands lie. Reading these subtle movements is both art and science, honed over decades, refined through generations. As the canoe glides across the water, the navigator monitors the swells with constant attention. Long, rolling waves, generated by storms hundreds of miles away, intersect with local wind-driven waves, producing patterns that can reveal hidden obstacles or distant land. These intersections are never random. When swells meet islands, they are reflected, refracted, or redirected, creating secondary waves. Skilled navigators detect these echoes through the tilt of the canoe, the way the waves push and pull at the hull, and the changes in the rhythmic motion underfoot. An island might remain unseen, but its presence is communicated. Equally invisible, are sensed through both observation and experience. Navigators note how the canoe drifts relative to the swells, how water flows against or with the hull, and how these movements change throughout the day and night. They understand that certain currents are predictable, guided by geography and seasonal winds, while others fluctuate with tides or local weather patterns. By combining knowledge of swells and currents, the navigator can anticipate the canoe's trajectory, correct for drift, and optimize the journey, ensuring efficiency and safety over hundreds or thousands of miles. The integration of swells, currents, and celestial observation creates a complex, dynamic system. Stars provide fixed points of reference, swells indicate long-distance conditions, and currents reveal subtle shifts in direction and speed. Together, they form a multi-layered navigation network that is constantly updated in the navigator's mind. This system requires acute attention, memory, and adaptability. The navigator's mind becomes a processing center, continuously synthesizing sensory input to maintain a coherent sense of position and direction. Life aboard the canoe reinforces this focus. Crew members rotate duties, maintaining the vessel, rowing when needed, and observing environmental cues. The navigator instructs apprentices in reading the water, teaching them to feel the angles of swells, distinguish between overlapping patterns, and predict how currents will influence the canoe's path. Lessons are experiential. A misread wave, a delayed response to a current, provides immediate feedback. Over time, this feedback sharpens perception, cultivates intuition, and refines the mental maps used for navigation. Swells and currents also inform resource management and decision-making. A navigator anticipating rough waters or strong opposing currents might adjust the course to conserve energy, ration food more carefully, or seek shelter on a nearby island if available. They understand that every movement of the canoe has consequences for the journey's duration, safety, and survival. Knowledge of the ocean's rhythms is therefore inseparable from practical, everyday decisions aboard the vessel. Birds, clouds, and other environmental signs augment this reading of the ocean. Seabirds returning to land, changes in cloud formation, or variations in watercolor signal proximity to islands, changes in currents, or impending weather shifts. Navigators synthesize these cues with the tactile and visual information from swells, currents, and stars. A single observation, interpreted correctly, could mean the difference between discovering an island and drifting aimlessly for days. Training apprentices in this skill involves both repetition and heightened attention. Mentors often blindfold students during short voyages to force reliance on the tactile sense of swells and currents. They challenge students to detect subtle changes in wave direction, current strength, or the tilt of the canoe. Over years, apprentices internalize these patterns, transforming sensory experience into instinctive knowledge. The ocean's signals become second nature, allowing navigators to focus simultaneously on multiple inputs without conscious effort. Despite the sophistication of this system, uncertainty is always present. Swells can be altered by sudden storms, currents can shift unexpectedly, and environmental cues may be obscured. Yet this uncertainty is not paralyzing. The navigator has learned to embrace ambiguity, adapt quickly, and apply knowledge creatively. Every voyage is both a test and a refinement of skill, continuous calibration of perception, memory, and intuition. Polynesian mastery of swells and currents demonstrates a profound human capability, the ability to perceive, interpret, and act on information embedded in natural systems. These navigators relied entirely on experience, observation, and mental processing, achieving accuracy and reliability without instruments or written maps. Their mental maps were living systems, continuously updated with each new observation, each new voyage, each subtle signal from the ocean itself. Yet questions remain. How exactly did navigators mentally integrate so many simultaneous sources of information? The tilt of the canoe, the rhythm of swells, currents, birds, clouds, and stars. How did they teach these skills with such precision across generations, ensuring survival and continuity? And what can these methods tell us about the human capacity for observation, memory, and adaptation in extreme environments? In the next section, we will follow Polynesian navigators on actual voyages, observing how the integration of swells, currents, and celestial guidance allowed them to traverse thousands of miles of open ocean, reach distant islands, and establish networks of migration and trade across the Pacific. The subtleties of these journeys reveal the quiet brilliance of a navigational tradition that has few equals in human history. The sun rises slowly over the Pacific, painting the water in pale golds and deep blues. A double-hulled canoe rocks gently atop the swells, a slender vessel carrying its crew across hundreds, even thousands, of miles of open ocean. For Polynesian navigators, this journey is a test of observation, intuition, and endurance. Every tilt of the hull, every shift in wave rhythm, every subtle current is read with practiced attention, feeding the navigator's mental map and guiding the canoe toward unseen islands on the horizon. Long voyages were the ultimate proving grounds for navigational skill. Consider a journey from Tahiti to the Marquesas Islands, a stretch of more than 1,000 miles across waters that appear uniform to the untrained eye. Success depended not merely on knowing the stars, but on reading the ocean itself. Swells carried information from distant storms, intersecting in complex patterns that reflected the presence of islands, reefs, or shifts in current. The navigator's senses, honed over years of apprenticeship, transformed these invisible signals into actionable guidance. Currents added both challenge and opportunity. Favorable flows could hasten the journey, reducing the strain on crew and provisions, while opposing currents demanded careful adjustment of course and effort. Navigators developed an acute sense of how water movement interacted with wind, swell, and the canoe itself. This knowledge was empirical, embodied, and continually refined through real-world experience. A single misjudgment in reading the currents could extend a voyage by days, straining resources and testing the crew's endurance. Life aboard the canoe was a delicate balance between routine and vigilance. Crew members rotated between rowing, maintaining the canoe, fishing, and observing environmental cues. Sleep was sporadic, punctuated by the need for constant observation. Food and water were rationed carefully, often supplemented by fishing or the collection of rainwater. The navigator, however, remained almost continuously engaged, integrating data from swells, currents, stars, clouds, and wildlife into a coherent mental map. Every observation mattered. Every decision could have life or death consequences. One of the most remarkable aspects of these voyages was the subtlety of cues that guided the canoe. Islands could remain unseen for days, yet experienced navigators detected their presence through reflected swells, changes in watercolor, or the approach of seabirds. Reefs and shallow waters created interference patterns in waves, signaling hazards before they became visible. Navigators learned to interpret these patterns through both sight and touch, feeling the motion of the canoe as an extension of the ocean's rhythm. Apprenticeship ensured that this knowledge was transmitted with precision. Young students spent years learning to recognize different types of swells, understand currents, and integrate these observations with celestial navigation. Mentors often blindfolded students during short voyages to cultivate tactile sensitivity to water movement. Mistakes were instructive. A misread swell could lead to drifting off course, but it also refined perception, improving the apprentice's ability to anticipate and interpret. Uncertainty was always present. Storms could mask swells, currents could shift unpredictably, and clouds might obscure the stars. The navigator's task was not only to detect these changes, but to adapt, recalibrate, and make decisions in real time. Each voyage was thus both a test of technical skill and a demonstration of resilience, patience, and cognitive flexibility. The ocean demanded continuous attention, and those who mastered it were rewarded with both survival and the expansion of their communities across the Pacific. The success of these voyages also had profound cultural and historical consequences. The ability to read swells and currents enabled migration, trade, and the establishment of settlements across thousands of miles of ocean. Plants, animals, and cultural practices spread between islands, shaping societies and economies. Navigators were not merely travelers, they were guardians of collective knowledge, their skills ensuring the survival and prosperity of entire communities. The ocean itself became a medium of connection, its patterns facilitating cultural continuity across vast distances. Even today, modern scientists and navigators study these techniques to understand how Polynesians achieved such extraordinary feats without instruments. Experiments replicating traditional voyages confirm the reliability of swell-based navigation, demonstrating that, with training, observation, and experience, humans can traverse open ocean with remarkable accuracy. These achievements highlight the extraordinary cognitive, sensory, and practical skills embedded in what might otherwise appear as mundane, boring details of ocean life. As we reflect on this mastery, questions linger. How exactly did navigators synthesize hundreds of simultaneous input swells, currents, stars, wind, and wildlife into a coherent mental map? How did societies preserve and transmit such complex knowledge across generations? And what does this reveal about human adaptability and perception in extreme environments, where survival depends on noticing patterns invisible to most? The story of reading swells and currents is a story of patience, skill, and quiet brilliance. It reminds us that even in the mundane repetition of observation, feeling the tilt of a canoe, noting the subtle pull of a current, watching the interplay of waves, extraordinary human achievement is possible. Polynesian navigators transformed the ocean into a text that could be read, interpreted, and acted upon, allowing them to conquer the vastest expanse of water on Earth without instruments, maps, or compasses. In these details, we find a history both humble and extraordinary, a history of mastery, survival, and the subtle art of attention. Close your eyes and imagine standing on the sandy shores of a Polynesian island. The morning sun casting soft light over the gentle surf. Before you lies a freshly constructed double-hulled canoe, its hulls carved from massive trees, polished smooth, and joined together with precision ropes and lashings. The canoe is more than a vessel, it is a repository of knowledge, a mobile classroom, and a testament to centuries of observation, experimentation, and cultural wisdom. Every plank, joint, and curve embodies an understanding of physics, hydrodynamics, and environmental adaptation, refined through generations of trial and error. The process begins long before a single tree is felled. Navigators and master craftsmen, often the same individuals, select timber with care, choosing species prized for strength, flexibility, and buoyancy. The trees are not simply harvested, they are studied. The growth patterns, density of the wood, and natural shape of the trunk all inform decisions about the whole's final design. The selection process is informed by experience. Which woods withstand long ocean voyages, which resist rot in salt water, and which can support the weight of a fully loaded canoe without compromising speed or stability. In this sense, knowledge of the forest and knowledge of the ocean are inseparably linked. Once selected, the logs are shaped using adzes, shells, and stones, meticulously carved to achieve a balance between strength and hydrodynamics. Hulls are designed to slice through waves efficiently while maintaining stability on long journeys. The curvature of the canoe is not arbitrary. It reflects an intimate understanding of how water interacts with a moving object. Builders consider factors such as center of gravity, weight distribution, and the interaction between the hulls in double canoe designs. Each decision is informed by generations of observation, which shapes glide most smoothly over swells, which configurations resist capsizing in heavy seas, and how to maximize cargo and crew capacity without sacrificing performance. The lashings binding hulls, crossbeams, and platforms together are themselves objects of knowledge. Rope making, knot tying, and binding techniques were developed to be strong, flexible, and repairable at sea. Craftsmen understood that lashings must absorb stress, resist saltwater degradation, and allow some flex to prevent the hulls from fracturing under the pressure of waves. The arrangement of beams and platforms created multifunctional spaces, areas for sleeping, storage, and observation, integrating the needs of daily life with the functional requirements of long distance. Voyaging canoes were also designed to accommodate navigation and observation. Elevated platforms allowed the navigator to scan the horizon, monitor swells, and observe celestial cues. Specific areas were designated for apprentices to practice skills such as observing currents, stars, or bird flight. In this way, the canoe itself became a floating classroom, a vessel where knowledge was applied, transmitted, and tested in real time. The very act of building the canoe was therefore both a technical and an educational exercise. The construction process required collaboration and specialized knowledge. Different members of the community contributed expertise: carvers, rope makers, navigators, and elders each played a role. This collective effort ensured that no detail was overlooked, and it facilitated the transmission of skills across generations. Techniques were not simply memorized, they were demonstrated, practiced, and refined, often accompanied by chants, stories, and ritualized instruction. The canoe, when completed, carried not only people and provisions, but also the intellectual and cultural heritage of the community. Even the smallest details were significant. The placement of outriggers, the taper of the hull, and the attachment of sails all influenced performance. Builders observed how subtle modifications affected handling, speed, and stability, constantly iterating designs based on experience and feedback. Canoes evolved over time, reflecting an empirical understanding of oceanic physics long before formal scientific study. These vessels were the result of centuries of accumulated experimentation, mistakes, and refinements, making each new canoe both a technological marvel and a repository of applied knowledge beyond technical mastery. The canoe held symbolic and cultural significance. It represented the connection between humans and their environment, the forest that provided timber, the ocean that defined travel and survival, and the sky that guided navigation. The act of building a canoe was as much a spiritual exercise as a practical one, incorporating rituals, blessings, and storytelling that reinforced communal identity and the continuity of knowledge. In every plank and lashing, the canoe carried the legacy of ancestors who had navigated vast oceans using skills honed over generations. The integration of craftsmanship and cognition in canoe construction invites reflection. How did builders encode so much knowledge into a single vessel? How did subtle variations in design transmit centuries of trial and error learning? And how did these floating classrooms shape the mental maps, navigational intuition, and environmental literacy of entire communities? In the next section, we will examine the launch and maiden voyages of these canoes, exploring how they functioned not only as transport but as living laboratories. We will follow apprentices and navigators as they apply the knowledge embedded in the hulls, lashings, and sails, testing the wisdom of generations against the vast and unpredictable ocean. The day of launch begins with quiet ceremony and careful preparation. A freshly built canoe rests on the sand, its hulls polished, lashings tight, and sails secured. Apprentices gather alongside experienced navigators and craftsmen, their attention focused on every detail: the angle of the hulls, the tautness of crossbeams, and the alignment of the sails. Launching a canoe is not merely a physical task. It is a ritualized performance that honors the accumulated knowledge embedded in the vessel itself. Every plank, every rope, every curve carries lessons learned over centuries. Once the canoe enters the water, its design is immediately tested. The hulls must balance under the weight of crew and provisions, responding to the subtle tilt of the waves without compromising stability. Double-hulled canoes, in particular, were designed for long voyages, providing both resilience and speed. The separation of hulls distributes weight efficiently, while lashings allow slight flexing, absorbing the stresses of swells and currents. Observing the canoe's behavior as it glides through water is a continuous learning process, both for apprentices and for seasoned navigators, refining their understanding of craft performance. The canoe is more than a transport vessel, it is a floating classroom. Elevated platforms allow the navigator to observe the horizon, note subtle changes in swells, and maintain a mental map of position relative to islands or currents. Apprentices are instructed in real time how to sense the tilt of the canoe, detect the direction and intensity of swells, and interpret changes in water, color, or texture. Every moment aboard the canoe reinforces theoretical knowledge through practical application, embedding lessons that cannot be taught on land. Provisioning the canoe is itself an exercise in applied knowledge. Navigators calculate quantities of food and water needed for the voyage, factoring in distance, expected conditions, and the number of crew members. Food is stored strategically to minimize spoilage and maintain balance aboard the canoe. Rainwater collection and storage techniques are employed, reflecting a deep understanding of environmental variability and resource management. The canoe, therefore, is a mobile system of both transportation and survival strategy, where knowledge and skill converge in practical ways. During early stages of the voyage, the navigator constantly observes and interprets swells, currents, and wind patterns. These observations are integrated with celestial cues as night falls. Stars rising above the horizon reinforce the navigator's mental map, while swells provide tactile feedback on direction and distance. The canoe's design amplifies these cues. The curvature of the hulls, the flexibility of lashings, and the placement of platforms all make subtle signals from the ocean more perceptible. In this way, the canoe itself becomes an instrument of perception, enhancing the navigator's ability to interpret the living text of the ocean. Apprentices learn to handle challenges in real time. Sudden shifts in wind, unexpected currents, or approaching storms require immediate adjustment of sails, weight distribution, and course. These situations test both the canoe's construction and the crew's skill, providing feedback that reinforces understanding of hydrodynamics, structural resilience, and navigation. Mistakes, carefully observed and corrected, contribute to cumulative knowledge that will inform future voyages and future vessel designs. Cultural and social dimensions are integral to these voyages. Canoes carry stories, rituals, and symbols in addition to passengers and provisions. Launch ceremonies, blessings, and chants honor the ancestors whose wisdom is embedded in the vessel. Every action aboard the canoe, from adjusting a sail to observing swells, is connected to communal knowledge and responsibility. The canoe, in essence, is a microcosm of society, where skill, observation, and tradition converge to ensure survival and continuity. Observing the performance of the canoe at sea also informs ongoing refinement of designs. Builders note how hull shapes affect handling, how lashings respond to stress, and how the distribution of weight influences speed and stability. Lessons learned during voyages feed back into construction techniques, creating a continuous cycle of improvement. Each canoe embodies both historical knowledge and the results of practical experimentation, bridging the past and the present through tangible craftsmanship. Even the most carefully built and expertly handled canoes face uncertainty, storms, unexpected currents, and other natural variables test the skill of the navigator and the resilience of the vessel. Yet these challenges are not failures, they are opportunities for learning and adaptation. Knowledge is embedded not only in the physical structure of the canoe, but also in the practices, observations, and decision-making processes of those who sail it. The canoe is therefore both a repository of wisdom and an active tool for expanding knowledge through experience. The integration of construction, navigation, and observation raises compelling questions. How did apprentices internalize such complex information while balancing the physical and cognitive demands of long voyages? How did communities ensure that the accumulated knowledge of canoe design and navigation was preserved and transmitted with accuracy? And how might these lessons about embodied learning, environmental awareness, and iterative refinement inform modern approaches to education and practical skill development? In the next section, we will follow the maiden voyage of a newly built canoe, witnessing how navigators, apprentices, and the vessel itself interact with the open ocean. We will see the subtle interplay between design, observation, and adaptive decision-making, revealing how Polynesian canoes functioned as floating universities of knowledge and survival. The morning air is still and warm as the newly constructed canoe is carefully pushed from the shore into the gentle swell. Crew members, apprentices, and navigators settle into their positions, the vessel rocking lightly under their weight. This is the maiden voyage test, not only of the craftsmanship of the hulls and lashings, but also of the navigational knowledge, teamwork, and accumulated wisdom that have been encoded into every plank and rope. The canoe becomes a classroom in motion, a living experiment where theory meets the unpredictable ocean. As the canoe moves farther from shore, the subtle lessons embedded in its construction become immediately apparent. The double-hulled design provides stability even as swells begin to rise, while the lashings allow just enough flex to absorb energy from the waves without straining the hulls. Sails are adjusted to catch the prevailing wind efficiently, and the careful balance of provisions ensures that the canoe rides level. Every aspect of the vessel's design works in harmony with the navigator's knowledge, reinforcing the intimate connection between construction and function. The navigator, positioned on an elevated platform, begins observing the horizon for swells, currents, and cloud patterns. Stars, though not visible during the day, are already accounted for in the mental map, prepared for use as night approaches. Apprentices practice detecting subtle shifts in the tilt of the canoe, the texture of the water, and the motion of swells against the hull. These experiences translate the principles of canoe design into practical skill, showing how each structural decision interacts with the living dynamics of the ocean. The voyage progresses smoothly at first, allowing the crew to familiarize themselves with the rhythm of paddling, the behavior of the hulls, and the interplay between wind and waves. However, the ocean is never predictable. A sudden gust of wind pushes against the sails, tilting the canoe, while an unexpected intersecting swell creates a temporary imbalance. Instantly, navigators and apprentices apply what they have learned, adjusting sail tension, redistributing weight, and shifting the angle of the hulls to maintain stability. These real-time decisions are informed by both the design of the canoe and the acquired observational skills, demonstrating how knowledge, structure, and experience operate in tandem throughout the journey. The canoe functions as a living laboratory. Every wave, every current, every tilt provides feedback. Builders note how the hull responds under different conditions. Navigators test their predictions of currents and swells, and apprentices refine their ability to interpret sensory cues. Mistakes are instructive. A misjudged current may carry the canoe slightly off course, yet this deviation becomes a lesson in correction, observation, and adaptation. The canoe is simultaneously teacher and student, vessel and classroom. Nightfall brings new challenges. The stars emerge, and the navigator begins the delicate work of celestial observation, integrating these fixed points with the tactile sense of swells and currents. The elevated platforms, the design of the hulls, and the flexibility of lashings enhance the perception of these cues. Apprentices are instructed in how to reconcile sensory inputs, creating a holistic understanding of navigation that blends tactile, visual, and mental skills. Every element of the canoe wood, the lashings, the sails becomes a tool for learning, reinforcing knowledge through practice. Over the course of the voyage, the crew encounters various conditions: patches of calm water, choppy waves, shifting currents, and sudden gusts of wind. Each situation tests the resilience of the canoe and the skill of those aboard. Yet, despite these challenges, the canoe performs admirably. Its design, the careful distribution of weight, and the attention to detail in construction allow it to withstand environmental stress, while the navigator's expertise ensures that adjustments are made proactively rather than reactively. The voyage is a triumph of both engineering and embodied knowledge beyond the technical mastery. The maiden voyage is also a cultural experience. Rituals, songs, and storytelling accompany the practical tasks, embedding communal identity and shared memory into the voyage. Each maneuver, adjustment, or observation is framed within a larger narrative of tradition, survival, and cultural continuity. The canoe, therefore, is not only a vessel for travel, but a conduit for heritage, connecting the crew with ancestors who navigated the same waters using similar principles. By the end of the voyage, the canoe has proven itself as a floating university. Apprentices return with enhanced observational skills, practical experience in navigation, and a deeper understanding of how the vessel's construction integrates with environmental cues. Builders gain insights into the performance of their designs, refining techniques for future canoes. Navigators validate centuries of accumulated knowledge, demonstrating its continued relevance in the unpredictable environment of the open ocean. The canoe, in every plank and lashing, carries the collective wisdom of generations, teaching as it transports. The story of Polynesian canoe building and navigation leaves us with enduring questions. How did these communities maintain such precision and continuity of knowledge over centuries? How did the interplay between construction, observation, and practice shape cognitive and cultural development? And how might modern societies learn from this integration of craft, apprenticeship, and environmental literacy? Ultimately, the canoe exemplifies a profound principle. Knowledge is not merely written or spoken, it can be embodied, materialized, and lived through careful design, attentive practice, and intergenerational teaching. Polynesian canoes became floating repositories of expertise, demonstrating that even in the seemingly mundane details of construction and daily life, extraordinary human achievement is possible. Imagine standing on the bow of a canoe as the warm breeze brushes your skin, the sun rising over a horizon that seems to stretch endlessly. To the casual observer, the wind is a simple, invisible force. But to the Polynesian navigator, it is a carefully timed, predictable rhythm that dictates the best time to set out, the safest routes to follow, and even the success or failure of long voyages across the Pacific. These seasonal winds were not mysteries, they were part of a vast, intricate understanding of environmental patterns honed over centuries. The Pacific Ocean is vast, its currents and weather systems shaped by planetary forces, the tilt of the Earth, and the seasonal migration of pressure systems. Polynesian navigators learned to observe these patterns, noting the subtle changes in wind direction, intensity, and regularity across months and years. The trade winds, blowing consistently from the east in the tropics, became reliable guides, carrying canoes steadily westward. Conversely, monsoonal shifts and storm seasons were carefully avoided, with voyages timed to coincide with periods of calm and predictability. Understanding the calendar of winds was therefore critical for survival. Knowledge of seasonal winds was developed over generations, passed orally and reinforced through direct observation. Navigators noted not only the direction of the wind, but also its variations in strength, the time of day when shifts occurred, and the subtle changes preceding storms or unusual weather. By integrating these observations with star patterns, swell directions, and cloud formations, navigators created a complex mental model of the ocean's behavior over time. This was knowledge that could not be gleaned from a single voyage. It required cumulative experience across decades. The timing of departure was carefully calculated. Setting out too early could mean encountering unpredictable storms or unfavorable currents, while departing too late might shorten the available window for a safe voyage. Navigators monitored wind direction and consistency, often staying on land for days or weeks to wait for optimal conditions. This patience was not mere hesitation. It was an exercise in strategic observation, risk management, and environmental literacy. The ocean, after all, does not bend to human schedules. The relationship between seasonal winds and swells was particularly important. Winds generate swells, and these swells, traveling across hundreds of miles, serve as tactile signals for the presence of islands or reefs. By understanding the timing and intensity of seasonal winds, navigators could predict not only the best time to travel, but also the behavior of swells along the route. This integration of wind, wave, and celestial observation was central to Polynesian navigation, enabling journeys that could span thousands of miles with remarkable accuracy. Cultural and ceremonial practices were intertwined with these environmental patterns. Elders and navigators often consulted lunar cycles, seasonal festivals, and accumulated oral records to determine auspicious departure times. The observation of winds was not a solitary task. It was a communal exercise involving discussion, interpretation, and shared experience. In this way, the understanding of seasonal patterns became embedded within the social and cultural fabric of island communities. Navigators also learned to anticipate anomalies. Occasionally, winds might shift unexpectedly, signaling distant storms or unusual weather events. Recognizing these deviations required careful attention and years of experience. These observations were recorded mentally and reinforced through apprenticeship, ensuring that lessons from each voyage informed future generations. The ocean became a teacher, its patterns both predictable and occasionally surprising. Demanding continuous learning and adaptation, the integration of wind knowledge with other navigational cues created a robust system. Celestial navigation provided fixed reference points. Swells and currents offered tactile feedback, and seasonal winds supplied predictable movement across vast distances. Together, these elements formed a coherent, adaptable system capable of guiding canoes thousands of miles away from home. Apprentices trained in these practices developed acute observational skills, memory, and the ability to synthesize multiple streams of information, simultaneously a cognitive achievement of extraordinary sophistication. Yet, even with careful preparation, uncertainty remained. Storms could arise unexpectedly, wind patterns could shift, and human error could lead to Navigators had to balance confidence with humility, skill with adaptability. These journeys were exercises in both technical mastery and human resilience, requiring patience, perseverance, and respect for the forces of nature. By studying seasonal winds and predictable ocean patterns, Polynesians transformed a seemingly random environment into a structured, navigable space. Their knowledge illustrates how close observation, accumulated experience, and cultural transmission can allow humans to thrive in extreme environments. The predictability of the winds was not merely a convenience. It was a lifeline, a thread connecting island to island, enabling migration, trade, and the expansion of communities across the Pacific. Yet questions linger. How did navigators mentally encode and recall the intricate patterns of winds and swells over months or years? How was this knowledge shared across generations with such precision despite the absence of written records? And what might these practices teach us about the human capacity to observe, adapt, and survive in complex, dynamic systems? In the next section, we will follow navigators as they put this knowledge into practice, observing how mastery of seasonal winds intersects with swells, currents, and celestial navigation to carry canoes safely across vast distances of the Pacific. Would you like to continue to Section 2 of Story 5? The canoe rises and falls gently on the swells as the navigator scans the horizon. The seasonal winds, long anticipated, have begun their steady sweep from the east, filling the sails and carrying the vessel westward across open ocean. These winds are not merely a tool, they are a partner, an invisible force whose predictability shapes the rhythm of the voyage. To the Polynesian navigator, understanding when and how to harness them is as important as knowing the stars or the motion of swells and currents. Navigators observed that not all winds are equal. Trade winds, blowing consistently for months at a time, offered steady propulsion, but local variations caused by islands, seasonal pressure systems, or changes in temperature could alter speed and direction. By noting these subtleties, navigators could adjust sail angles, timing, and course to maximize efficiency. The ability to read and respond to wind patterns was crucial for conserving energy, managing provisions, and maintaining the morale of the crew during multi-week voyages. Seasonal winds also influenced broader strategic decisions. Long before departure, navigators would determine the optimal route by integrating wind direction with knowledge of currents, swells, and star positions. Certain paths, although longer in distance, offered more favorable winds, reducing strain on the canoe and crew. Conversely, a direct course against the wind could be disastrous, leading to slow progress, depleted supplies, and increased risk. These calculations, made mentally and with remarkable precision, highlight the sophistication of Polynesian oceanic knowledge. The interaction between winds and swells was particularly critical. As winds sweep across the ocean, they generate swells that propagate over vast distances. Navigators could feel these swells through the hull, even when the source wind was hundreds of miles away. By anticipating how the wind-generated swells would interact with currents and local conditions, they could predict optimal angles of approach, avoiding turbulent waters or taking advantage of favorable momentum. The canoe, designed with a careful balance of hull shape, weight, and lashings, responded to these inputs with remarkable sensitivity, translating natural forces into motion that was both efficient and controllable. Navigators also paid close attention to the timing of seasonal changes. Certain months offered steady winds that aligned with migration or trade routes. Other periods brought unpredictable monsoons or storms that could imperil the voyage. Planning voyages around these cycles required both long-term observation and careful record-keeping, often transmitted orally through generations. Young apprentices learned to recognize not only the current conditions, but also the historical patterns. What winds typically blew during a particular lunar month, how swells behaved during seasonal transitions, and which routes were safest at specific times of year. Daily routines aboard the canoe were intertwined with wind management, adjusting sails to capture shifting gusts, redistributing weight to maintain balance, and monitoring the response of the hull to wind and swell were constant tasks. Crew members were trained to act quickly and deliberately, while the navigator synthesized information to anticipate future conditions. The interplay of human skill and environmental forces was continuous, creating a dynamic learning environment where theory and practice reinforced each other. Even when conditions were favorable, challenges persisted. A sudden lull in the wind could halt progress, requiring careful maneuvering and patience. Gusts from unexpected directions could destabilize the canoe, forcing rapid adjustments. Navigators needed a keen awareness of both immediate conditions and the broader seasonal context to respond effectively. Mistakes were instructive, and overcorrection or misjudgment could be measured in lost distance, delayed arrival, or increased fatigue for the crew. Each experience refined understanding, feeding back into the collective knowledge of the community. Beyond practical concerns, the mastery of seasonal winds carried cultural and social significance. Canoes were not just transport, they were instruments of exploration, trade, and community connection. The ability to read and harness winds ensured that people, food, and ideas could move safely between islands. navigators held positions of great respect. Their skill in interpreting seasonal patterns, safeguarding both the material and social well-being of their communities. The ocean became a medium through which knowledge, culture, and survival were transmitted across generations. The predictability of seasonal winds also enabled long-term planning and societal development. Agricultural cycles, interland trade, and even ceremonial events were timed with the expectation of favorable winds. Communities relied on navigators' ability to interpret seasonal patterns, demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of environmental rhythms and their integration with human activity. The ocean's predictable patterns became a framework for life itself, shaping economic, cultural, and social structures. Yet uncertainty was never entirely absent. Anomalous weather, shifting currents, or unforeseen changes in wind patterns demanded vigilance, flexibility, and adaptation. Navigators cultivated a mindset of continuous observation, critical thinking, and resilience. They knew that the ocean's patterns, while predictable, were also dynamic, and survival depended on harmonizing skill with humility. As we consider this mastery, questions arise. How did navigators encode complex seasonal cycles into memory? An apprenticeship without written records. How were such precise observations and timing communicated across generations? And how might this deep, experiential understanding of environmental rhythms inform modern navigation, climate awareness, or ecological planning? In the next section, we will follow navigators on actual voyages timed with seasonal winds, observing how these patterns guide canoes across vast distances, how they intersect with swells and currents, and how mastery of wind knowledge ensures the success of long and often perilous oceanic journeys. The first light of dawn glints across the Pacific, illuminating the gentle swells as the canoe cuts steadily through the water. The crew adjusts the sails to catch the eastward trade winds, a rhythm that has been observed, interpreted, and trusted for generations. These winds are not just a breeze, they are a temporal guide, marking the seasons, dictating departure windows, and shaping the very rhythm of life for island communities. The navigator, positioned on a raised platform, senses the alignment of wind, swell, and celestial bodies, integrating these forces into decisions that will determine the success of the voyage. As the canoe advances, the benefits of seasonal wind mastery become evident. With consistent eastward winds, the vessel maintains speed with minimal effort, conserving energy and provisions for both crew and canoe. The navigator continually monitors subtle variations, shifts in wind angle, intensity, and gustiness that might influence course corrections. By anticipating these changes, the canoe can be steered along the most efficient path, avoiding hazards and taking advantage of favorable currents that reinforce the wind's momentum. Every adjustment demonstrates the delicate dance between human skill and natural rhythm. Apprentices aboard the canoe are keen observers, learning to correlate changes in wind with patterns in swells and currents. A sudden increase in wind velocity, combined with a particular swell direction, might signal the approach of a distant storm. The navigator instructs the crew on sail trimming, weight distribution, and course adjustments, ensuring both safety and efficiency. This experiential learning, grounded in real-world conditions, reinforces centuries of accumulated knowledge and hones perceptual acuity that cannot be conveyed through words alone. The predictability of seasonal winds enables strategic route selection. Long voyages, such as journeys from Tahiti to the Hawaiian Islands or from Samoa to Tonga, are planned around the expected behavior of these winds. Navigators anticipate favorable stretches where trade winds carry the canoe swiftly westward, and identify periods where temporary deviations in wind patterns might require course corrections or short-term shelters on smaller islands. Each decision reflects the integration of wind knowledge with an understanding of currents, swells, and celestial cues. Yet, even with this mastery, challenges arise. Seasonal winds, though predictable, are not immune to anomalies. Sudden calms, unexpected gusts, or localized wind shifts can test both the navigator's skill and the resilience of the canoe. Crew members must remain vigilant, adjusting sails and weight, while the navigator continually reassesses conditions and predicts future changes. These moments highlight the combination of experience, intuition, and observation required for successful voyaging across thousands of miles of open ocean. The influence of seasonal winds extends beyond the voyage itself. By aligning travel with predictable environmental patterns, Polynesians ensured the reliability of interland communication, trade, and cultural exchange. Communities coordinated agricultural production, ceremonial events, and migration schedules around these wind patterns. In this way, seasonal winds were not simply a navigational tool, they were a framework around which social, economic, and cultural life revolved. Knowledge of the winds enabled long-term planning, fostering both survival and the flourishing of complex societies across the Pacific. Cultural practices reinforced this environmental literacy. Rituals, chants, and oral histories encoded knowledge of wind behavior, creating a shared memory that ensured continuity across generations. Navigators trained apprentices through practical experience, integrating lessons in observation, anticipation, and adaptation. In this way, the wisdom of seasonal winds was embodied, not just learned, fostering a deep, intuitive understanding of the ocean's cycles. The maiden voyage illustrates the subtle brilliance of this knowledge. The canoe glides efficiently, currents are anticipated, swells navigated, and islands approached long before. Every aspect of the journey, from departure timing to sail adjustment, from weight distribution to celestial observation, is informed by a sophisticated comprehension of environmental rhythms. The navigator's skill, coupled with the crew's discipline and the canoe's design, transforms predictable winds into a conduit for exploration, survival, and cultural continuity. By the end of the voyage, the crew has internalized lessons that cannot be conveyed through books or maps. The seasonal winds have become more than an environmental feature. They are a living, temporal guide, teaching patience, observation, and adaptability. The success of the journey illustrates the profound human ability to encode, transmit, and apply environmental knowledge over vast distances and across generations, ensuring survival in one of the most challenging landscapes on Earth. Yet, questions linger. How did navigators integrate such extensive temporal and spatial knowledge into their mental maps? How did apprenticeship and cultural practice ensure that this knowledge remained precise and reliable? And what might these methods reveal? about the ways humans can perceive and harmonize with natural cycles, even in the absence of modern instruments. The story of seasonal winds and predictable ocean patterns reminds us that mastery over the environment does not always require technology. Through observation, experience, and cultural transmission, Polynesian navigators harnessed the rhythms of the earth itself, turning wind, water, and sky into a reliable guide across the vast Pacific. In the calm discipline of observation and the precise timing of action, they achieved a quiet brilliance that resonates through history.